Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 6th of December, 2024. Let's play a bit of good week, bad week. Good week for Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Bad week for people who want to change in the country, really. Good week for Hunter Biden. Bad week for old people in the UK. And a good week, Sarah, for people who want to watch the toy show. That's on tomorrow night. Will you and the kids be staying up?
No, I
stayed up tonight, actually,
kids.
because we're recording this on Thursday.
Oh, yeah. No, it's too late. This is my criticism. It's also, I find it kind of boring. But last year I stayed up with the kids and I think it didn't start until like 9:30, 10 o'clock or something. And by then the kids had eaten all the sweets that I got them, were feral and furious and tired and gnarly, and the whole thing was a disaster. So I might record it and play it for them on Saturday.
Well, the reason I'm mentioning it is because I rarely do this. I just say I show the listeners and the viewers, indeed, that I'm generous of spirit. I want to quote from an article I came across this evening in our friends over at the Journal. I don't normally positively quote their articles, but Niamh O'Reilly has written something. She says, the Late Late Toy Show, it's not really for kids anymore, is it? Who are we kidding? The Late Late Toy Show isn't really for the kids anymore, is it? It's not even about the toys either. Be brutally honest now, who is more excited in your household for this annual Irish ritual as revered in our nation and as intertwined with our Irishness? Wait for this, Sarah, now. Wait for this. As a cup of Barry's tea and a packet of potatoes. Is it your very young children who are actually making Santa lists this year and living in their magical era? Or is it you, the grown-ups in the room, who are dying to play Late Late Toy Show drinking bingo and take a swig every time Patrick Keelty says there's one for everyone in the audience while you scroll on Twitter with people's reaction to that hilarious kid who upstages them at every opportunity? I have to say, for me, Naomi has nailed it there. I find it insufferable. Every year. Now, maybe it's because I don't have any kids, but I just find this whole kind of cult of the Late Late Toy Show drives me round the twist. It's not really for kids.
Well, it's also kind of boring to me personally. Like, there's usually a few cute kids in it. I'll take that or whatever. But like, there's a lot of sitting there for. I mean, I've never really got it. I've never been that person. The problem is that if you have kids the age of my kids, they hear about it at school for the whole week, and then they think they want to watch it because there's this thing about it. But when they actually sit down, it's more about the sweets and the whole thing. But then when it's actually on, they're a bit kind of like, there's the odd toy that interests them, but pretty much they're a bit like, what is this?
I think you should make them watch it. As I said,
it's too late. As a punishment.
I think you should make them watch it. For the whole 3 bloody hours, everything. Stay up to 11 o'clock. And then at the end, you should say, and now I hand me over your pocket money for the week because you have to pay the RTE TV license because you watched that. That's what I would do. This is why I don't have kids. But that's what I would do.
You wouldn't do that.
All right, maybe I wouldn't. Look, let's talk about the general election. You and I were talking on the phone during the week, and you kind of said something which summed up how I was feeling as well. And I'll let you lead off. And I haven't even asked you whether you want to talk about this on the podcast. But you said you experienced, I'm not going to use the word you used, but like a little bit of the blues after the election result. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, well, you can get into the weeds on specific things. But I never expected that there was going to be a change of government or anything dramatic. But I did have higher expectations for even the quality of the opposition that would call the government to task on things that will be on the legislative agenda and on, and things that may or may not arise over the next 5 years. And so, I wanted AIM to do better. I wanted Independent Ireland, people like that to do better. And AIM2 gained 1 seat and Independent Ireland gained 1 seat. And yeah, I was a bit disappointed about
that. I wasn't disappointed by that. I kind of expected that. I remember I wrote an article before the election saying that AIM2 would have a really good day if they got 3, and they got 2. Yeah. So they had an okay day. Their problem was always concentrating their vote in the right constituencies, right? I was just depressed by the fact that it was something you said to me during the week where you said that one of your children will be a teenager by the time we have another election, which is true. And I will be 45, possibly 46. So like that's 5 years.
That's assuming they go the whole hog. But yeah.
But they will because it looks to me very much like this is going to be Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael independence. And there's one thing independents never like, it's an early election. I don't really see what could bring them down to have an early election, barring some kind of national catastrophe. But assuming, and I think it's a reasonable assumption, they go the whole term, like it's 5 or 6 years. We have just basically as a country, I mean, I'm struck by a conversation I had with somebody this week who was a couple of weeks ago. This person was in my ear, literally rang me up and said about the bike shed controversy. He said, Gript has to keep pushing that. You need to get answers on that. You need to hold their feet to the fire. There needs to be change. We need to know who was responsible. And of course we tried, and ultimately we didn't get anywhere because no one's really interested in taking responsibility. But then I was talking to that very same person this week. How did they vote? Well, in their constituency, they voted for Fianna Fáil. I said, why did you vote for Fianna Fáil? He said, well, it's the economy, really, isn't it? Just stay with where we are for the next couple of years. And this is the same guy who a couple of weeks ago was saying, hold their feet to the fire. And it just strikes me that people sometimes don't realize an election is your only chance to register any kind of, dissatisfaction with the way the country is going. I mean, this guy is on to me every couple of months about what's wrong with the country. And, and next time I take his call, I'll still take his call because he's a relatively decent friend of mine. I'll still take his call. I'm not going to fall out with him. But I find it baffling in a way and sort of dispiriting and depressing.
Yeah, and I think that another thing for me, and that's when we were talking about it this week, was that it used to be the case that there would often be, take for example, 2009, there was local and European elections, and then 2011, there was a general election. So there'd be kind of these 2-year, 3-year gaps. But the locals just happened. So this is actually 5 years, apart from a presidential election next year, and that's a kind of a separate thing. It's 5 years now for another general election or a local election. And as you say, that's the opportunity to call the government to task. And yes, there'll be now conversations about government formation. And let's suppose it does end up being independence or whatever. We then have an opposition that's largely been changed by, more Social Democrats, fine. So that's just more Labour on steroids. And Sinn Féin, who, recovered sufficiently and didn't, in the final weeks, that my fear would be that they will have learned no lessons from the drop in their support leading up to the election, if you know what I mean. So I felt, and I've said it on the podcast numerous times, that one of the issues with Sinn Féin, obviously immigration was a huge thing with their base, but one of the things that really disappointed me about Sinn Féin was the fact that they weren't
an opposition.
They didn't take a position of opposition on a number of the key issues that mattered to me, the referendums, etc., etc., etc. And this sort of recovery in their vote in the last few weeks means to me that they're taking that as almost like a mandate of their position. You know what I mean? And that there won't be any real significant change in the way they approach things. Same for Fianna Fáil. And the same for Labour. Labour did very well. I would say personally, and I know there's people who'd say, well, she would say that, but I really do believe it. I don't think that Labour did particularly well because of their leadership. I think that the people who got elected for Labour largely got elected despite their leadership. I don't think Ivana Bacik is performed well during the campaign. I think the Labour campaign was weak, but they did very well in terms of seat numbers. So I think across the board, Sinn Féin, Labour, Fianna Fáil, they've all gotten what they are interpreting as a mandate from the people for more of the same. And there's no lesson to be learned. The only party that seems to have done badly in the election and, will be very disappointed with their result is Fine Gael. Now, it remains to be seen whether they actually change anything. Oh, I forgot about them. They existed. Yeah.
A week ago they existed, yeah.
A week ago they existed, and now they're one guy. But we'll get to that in a minute. But my point is that if you are on our side of things in the country, you weren't realistically expecting a great change in any way. But I had reasonable hope that there would be small changes that would have large impact. And that's what I'm disappointed about.
Well, I'll give you the optimistic take, the sort of interesting take that I've been developing over the last day or two as I look at this. Because I think that if you're looking at forming a government here, I don't see any, no, famous last words, come and laugh at me in a couple of weeks if I'm wrong. I just don't see Labour or the Social Democrats going into government. I don't see what's in it for them. I mean, yeah, sure, they'll get a couple of policies implemented, but by and large, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael don't need them. They'll drive a hard bargain. and they'll get greened in 5 years if they go into government. Whereas in the alternative, if you look at Sinn Féin, the Green Party, Labour and the Social Democrats, those four parties together, you've got a bloc there that got 32% of the vote and has 67 seats. Which is a lot of seats for 32% of the vote, by the way. It's a lot of seats. It was really overperformed. And if they work together in opposition and form a coherent bloc, they start to look like a potential left-wing government in waiting, because they would need modest gains for sure at the next election, but bad economic event or just some of those Fianna Fáil transfers unwind or whatever. Government is within reach when you have a bloc that is basically ideologically coherent and has 67 seats. So why do you undermine that by going with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael when Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael can go and talk to Michael Lowry and Verona Murphy and that group of non-ideological independents and form their centrist government? So I think I think there will be change in Irish politics in front of this election. I think that if the left is sensible, they can box Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael with independents into governing on their own, which hopefully, I mean, this is the optimist in me, would allow those two parties the space to be more common sense on some issues and not just go chase the woke vote that's always going to go to the left anyway. Do I sound crazy? Or is that a possibility?
No, it's a possibility. I think go on.
I mean, I just think if you're on the left in Irish politics, that's a smart thing to do, right? I mean, you're not going to, if you want a realignment that gets Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael out of power and gets a left-wing government, the smart thing to do is to come together. Now, of course, trying to herd left-wingers together is like trying to get any group of ideologues together. I mean, just look at the way the fringe groups on the right are fighting this week after the election. I mean, it's very hard to do, but if they could work coherently together and form a coherent left-wing bloc and say, okay, well, Mary Lou is the leader of the alternative government, but we pledge ourselves as left-wing parties to work with her if you strengthen our hand, there's the possibility of a strong, coherent left-wing opposition in the Dáil, which I would hope might just have the effect of telling Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, well, hang on a second, your bread is no longer buttered on that side of the fence, lads. There are votes over here amongst the independents that are still up for grabs for you. So that's the most optimistic take on the election I can find. I'll probably be terribly wrong.
I saw Sinead Gibney from the Social Democrats on TV straight out of the bat saying that she's not planning on spending her political career in the backbenches and that they're, all experts in their fields or whatever she said, and that, they want to contribute. She's an expert in jobs and NGOs. So, I mean... Yeah,
she'll soon find out that she had far more power when she was the chairwoman of the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission than she ever will as backbench TD, by the way. I mean, we're looking forward to Sinead finding that out.
Yeah.
But she will. She'll find that out.
But yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the Social Democrats, particularly people who are, and Sinead Gibney ran in the European elections and then ran in this. So she's not like completely new to politics, but in terms of years, she's relatively new to politics. And I think that they will find, themselves depressed by, what they find. But I think I wouldn't, going back to Labour, like I would say Ivana Bacik has, expectations that she will, seek a ministerial job for herself. But look, it remains to be seen. I think you're right. I think it's probably better if they go in with a group of independents, and, Labour and the Soc Dems sit on the backbenches again. But if you're a 45, 50-year-old Labour TD or whatever, and this is your second or third term, long time to wait to get anything done.
Yeah, but you're looking at it from their perspective and not from the perspective of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. I mean, I know before the election there was all this talk of, we'd like to put Labour in, but then they actually got so close to power by themselves, just 2 seats away. I mean, what are you going to give up? Labour have 11 seats, and them up, give 2 valuable cabinet seats away, a huge chunk of the programme for government, big row over housing. Labour and the Soc Dems would be just as extreme on climate stuff in rural Ireland as the Greens would be. I'm not sure that the average Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael backbencher is going to look at this and go, look, there's a bunch of independents there who just want a few roads and that for their constituency, which our local guys will benefit too from too, by the way. Because the Fianna Fáil TD here in Tipperary North is going to take credit for whatever Michael Lowry brings back. I think what will happen is, they may enter negotiations, but I mean, both sides are going to drive a hard bargain that's designed to not be able to do a deal. That's my instinct. And of course, they could prove me entirely wrong. I also just think it will be a mad thing to do when the left has, for the first time in living memory, the opportunity to have a broad left-wing opposition and set out a governing agenda, which will no doubt be awful. But, that is an opportunity that they have rather than squabbling all the time.
Look, it remains to be seen. I mean, the news has been full all week of the news of them going in, who's meeting who. I had to laugh today when I heard on the radio that Roderick O'Gorman, the Green Party was meeting with, I think it was Sinn Féin or Labour. And it's like, does he just go into the room on his own now, Rodgers, and just sit there and kind of go, right, lads, let's just like pretend we're talking and we'll just run the clock down. What on earth does a one-man party have to talk about?
I don't know if you saw the piece I wrote this week, and I'm sure you didn't have time to read it, but I wrote it and I was saying, his life is actually, if I was him, I'd almost wish I'd lost my seat.
Yeah.
Because his life now is going to be misery. He's gone from cabinet minister, if you can imagine this, lads, if you're listening, sitting at cabinet every Tuesday morning, making decisions, being the leader of a party of 14, to suddenly, Sarah, not even having automatic speaking rights in the Dáil. He's effectively an independent. He's the leader of a one-man party. He doesn't have speaking rights. He's going to have to do a deal with People Before Profit and maybe Catherine Connolly from Galway. That'll be a group of 5. They might get speaking rights if they band together.
And explain how that works. So once you have a group of 5, you have speaking rights, but then do you divvy up the speaking rights between you?
Yes.
Or do you just...
And in fact, it's really interesting because the old Rural Independent Group, which combined Matty McGrath, Carol Nolan, and the Healy Rays, has come back with only 4 TDs. And you need 5 to get a technical group with speaking rights. Now, not divulging any inside information, but basically they need 1 more. And the problem is that all their likely allies have gone elsewhere. So Independent Ireland, obviously, have 4 TDs of their own. They're going to partnership with somebody else. Aintu are going in, I think, with the other independent group. So yeah, I mean, you need 5. So I know that there's frantic right now today, as we're recording this on Thursday, the 5th of December. There's frantic negotiations going on behind the scenes to form speaking groups. And yes, obviously, then you get 5, and you've an opportunity to speak in every debate. So you divvy those up between the various TDs. But 4 isn't enough.
Well, it'll be interesting. I mean, getting into the...
I think Roderick should go in with the Healy Rays. I think that'll be very funny.
I was just thinking that's never going to happen. Talk about the worst date in history. But there was also other elements to the election that were fun. Starting from my old haunt, Dublin Bay South. Dublin Bay South overachieved in terms of delivering fun stuff for me in this election. Starting from the top, Hazel Chu did not get elected, did not come close to getting elected, and that was better for everyone concerned. Kate O'Connell, former Fine Gael Lovey, who received an inordinate amount of media attention in the lead up to the election, bombed out and was swiftly taken over and within a count or 2 by Nick Delhanty, who was right behind her.
Kate nearly got a vote, nearly got 1 vote for every flattering profile in the Sunday Independent. Yeah,
at the very least, yeah.
Almost, yeah. Anyway,
so that was wonderful for everybody concerned, also. And then, in the crowning glory or cherry on top, if you want to call it, of Dublin Bay South's achievements in this election, the voters of Dublin Bay South rejected Chris Andrews of Sinn Féin, former Fianna Fáil, and he has now lost his seat. And we're talking about the length of time it is before the local and the European elections, 5 years. But I'd say Chrissy is looking ahead at that 5 years with despair as well.
Oh, well, who knows? There might be a by-election now that the Social Democrat candidate has been exposed by the Daily Mail as having once, 7 or 8 years ago, worked for a company that supplies arms to the Israeli state. So who knows? But that actually brings me to something.
I read that article just briefly on that because I'm, not one for defending Social Democrats for sure. But I will say, are you really saying, how are you supposed to know that a company you worked for 7 years? I think it's a bit of a stretch. Do you not?
No, it's ridiculous. It's a nonsense. I said as much on Twitter. You have to be insane to think that it is news that a guy once had a job, which ended long before the current war started, and in a company that supplies lots and lots of stuff to lots of people, but also one of them is the Israeli Defense Forces. I mean, come on. I mean, medical companies presumably supply equipment to defense forces all around the world. Look, it's nonsense. But it brings me on to something I wanted to talk about, actually. which was two things. First of all, the incredible performance of the Social Democrats.
Yeah, you were
Because
right.
it was incredible. I was right. I did say before the election that a lot of votes would end up in the Social Democrat basket from just nice left-wing people who didn't really know who to vote for and wanted to vote for fluffy kittens and puppies and rainbows. And they did. But secondly, the real thing that strikes me, and I'm going to talk not about the Social Democrats on this, but is the real power of that vote left, transfer left thing. Because my most embarrassing moment on election day, or it was actually the day after election day, it was the second day of the count, was I looked at the figures in Dublin Central, where there were 2 counts to go. Jerry the Monk Hutch had over a 2,000 vote lead over the Labour candidate there, Marie Sherlock. And there were, I think, about 4,500 votes left to transfer.
Yeah.
And I said, that can't be made up. Because in any normal packet of 4,500 votes, I mean, if that's any other, just no way. You're not doing that.
In many parties, you would be worried about that gap from party to party. You wouldn't be guaranteed, if that was a two Fine Gaelers or Fianna Fáilers, you wouldn't automatically be guaranteed that transfer was fully coming your way in the form of 2,000 votes. Do you know what I mean? So it seemed like an insurmountable gap.
Yeah, it was. No, she had the benefit that some of them, so she had one small benefit was that some of those votes were counted twice because they pushed Pascal Donoghue over the quota. So then there was a surplus transferred. So basically she got to double dip a couple of times.
Yeah.
But even at that, what struck me right across the election was the number of final seats. I mean, even Roderick O'Gorman took the last seat in Dublin West ahead of Ellen Troy Amaintu, now comfortably, but he did it on the strength of left-wing voters transferring. And in loads of constituencies, like Owen Hayes, came through that field in Dublin Bay South. I remember saying to you, and you didn't disagree with me as we were looking at the tallies come in that morning, Chris Andrews is safe as houses. He's going to be well in the top 4. I remember talking to a very senior Fine Gael tally man early on in the morning of the count, looking at the figures come in. Chris Andrews is safe as houses. And Owen Hayes did it because left-wing voters just transferred. And I mean, we've had rows on sort of the non-left-wing side of Irish politics now for weeks and weeks and weeks among script readers about transfer. The left have turned this into an art form. Like in over the recent 3 or 4 elections. I mean, you saw it with Niall Boylan, right?
Yeah.
In the European elections, the way he was overtaken. Now, he would have been overtaken anyway, I think, when you look at the figures, but he was overtaken very comfortably and very methodically by a vote left, transfer left.
Well, there was a perfect storm of a number of things there. One of the things, and we can get to it in a minute, is too many candidates from the same pool running. And there's just not a discipline there yet amongst the centre right leaning candidates, right wing candidates, whatever. And then huge percentage of spoiled votes. I tallied them. I went up and watched them be disposed of myself. Huge amount of people who would put hundreds. I mean, I saw them with my own eyes who would put obviously a couple of numbers on the local election ballot, and then it would be number 3 or number 4 or number 5 only on the European one beside Niall Boylan's name. So that is a spoiled vote. So she was counting them out, and they were like obviously all number 1 votes for Niall Boylan. So huge percentage of spoiled votes, low turnout in the areas where Niall Boylan was the strongest, and then the transfer.
Yeah. But it was the same in the general. Well, the point I'm making is the same in the general election, like the left-wing transfer in constituency after constituency. You saw these Labour and the Soc Dems. I don't have the figures in front of me, folks, but like over half their seats were the last seat in the constituency taken on transfers at the last, often by the skin of their teeth. Now, the bad news for them is that if they happen to go into government or something like that, those seats will immediately become incredibly vulnerable at the next election. But so long as this vote left, transfer left thing keeps going on, I mean, the Soc Dems and Labour got just under 10% of the vote between them and got 22 seats, which is far more than they should have gotten, I think. Yeah, it's about 5 seats more than they should have gotten based on their votes. Meanwhile, Aintu were only 0.9% behind either of them and only got 2 seats because of partially was concentrating their vote, that's one thing, but also the transfers were very poor. Matt Tracy's done a lot on this week.
You mentioned there Ellen Troy, in a battle for the last seat with Roderick O'Gorman, and she's just like, she got a really good first preference vote and she's in it and it's going really well, but she's just not getting enough transfers and he's just creeping up and creeping up and creeping up behind her. Heart, like, soul destroying. But there just needs to be more discipline. And you can talk about, and it's a kind of a separate issue, Malachy Steenson running in Dublin Central, and then the Gerard Hutch coming in on top of him. But like, the reality of it is that, I'm sure if Malachy was here, and I don't want to speak to him, but he did speak to us on the day that he felt that if Gerard Hutch hadn't run, he would have got elected, or he certainly would have gotten a much higher vote. And anecdotally, what his tally men were saying was that a lot of the Hutch votes were number 2 Malachy, and they were extrapolating from that they would have gone to him. The point is that multiple candidates cannibalizing each other and then not being disciplined enough to transfer to each other is the end of the line for most of those candidates. And even in situations where those candidates were in fights for the last seat, if you're not getting the transfers, pointless.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that I'm drawing the comparison is that if you look at a candidate like Noel Thomas over in Galway West, who's running for Independent Ireland, Noel was at the races for a long time.
I thought he was going to win.
I thought he was going to win too, but he was. I mean, if you compare the transfer he was getting to the transfer that Catherine Conley, who's a left-wing independent, was getting from Labour and the Sockdowns and the Greens, she was constantly out of reach, just constantly out of reach all the time. So Noel had a very impressive performance, but he just wasn't as transfer friendly as some of his opponents were. And that is the same for, even Ken O'Flynn, who got a very good first preference vote and did take the seat for Independent Ireland, it was not as transfer friendly as I thought he'd be. And it was a longer slog for him to get over the line than I thought it should have been as well. So, there's lessons to be learned there, I think.
Do you think that Independent Ireland will be very disappointed with that result? 4 seats, 1 extra.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, they were surprisingly close, I thought, to maybe 6, because they had Noel Thomas was quite close in Galway, and then they had a candidate who kind of came out of nowhere, whose name, and forgive me if you're listening, I can't remember your name off the top of my head, but they candidate up with Sligo Leitrim, who came very close as well and was finally undone again on transfers by Marion Harkin. They got fewer votes than Aintu got and twice as many seats. You can't call that a bad performance. You just can't. Yeah. And they have a couple of people there who are likely to be, if they stick at it, in the running to pick up seats at the next election. That said, I do think they left votes on the table. I think that they and I'm sorry, I call it as I see it, as I think you do as well. I don't think Michael Collins had a great election as leader. I don't think Michael Fitzmaurice had a great debate when he was on television on the immigration issue. I think they campaigned more like a group of independents than a political party. And I think I get the sense that Kieran Mullooly has an awful lot of influence over their thinking, which I'm not sure is the best decision in the history of the world. But I think they still have a lot of potential.
Yeah, I think long term it will. When people look back, they will say it's a massive mistake to have Kieran Mullooly on every in-house, out-house, roadshow, doghouse, TV thing during the campaign. I know he's an MEP and whatever, but I still think that it was not a good idea. I think Kieran Mullooly and the grouping he joined in Europe, etc., left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, and I don't think there's any point in reminding them about him. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, well, that was the call they made. Before we move off the election, can we talk about? I'm not including Malachy Steenson and Gavin Pepper and the independents in this, but I am a little bit, I guess. We talk about the true Gaels, the nationalists, and their performance, because I saw a lot of fruitcakery this week. Some people saying, the election was rigged. I saw some people saying, we actually made progress. They had some candidates like Jan McGurrichtig for the National Party in Dublin Southwest, I think it was, who he only got 1,200 or 1,300 votes, but he actually quadrupled the National Party vote, right? And they did have some success somewhere in terms of making incremental progress, those guys. But I just look at them and I keep going, you're too extreme, lads. You're too extreme for the electorate. That's why you're not getting anywhere. And they can't seem to figure that out.
Yeah.
50% of voters, this is what I keep coming back to, 50% of voters in the exit poll who voted for Fine Gael said immigration is too high. That is your number one issue if you're on the sort of nationalist, fringy end of nationalism. That's your number one issue. Your voters are voting, people who agree with you are voting Fine Gael because they trust them more on every other issue than you do. You're too extreme. Am I wrong?
No, of course they're too extreme. And there's just a way of packaging your message better. And, we have talked about this before, and there's a huge amount of people in Ireland who are voting who I call stabilitarians, and they, like a bit of stability, whatever. And the irony of it is that they agree with you on a lot of, or some of your issues, but you're just not presenting it properly.
Yeah, I look at Herman Kelly in Louth, and I've talked to Herman on a podcast for Gript. I like Herman. I think he's a nice guy. I think there's no doubt that Herman puts in the work. He got 5.5% of the vote in Louth, which is not an unimpressive performance. Like, there's a lot of candidates who would be killing for a performance of 5.5%. But then I look at the party and I'm like, once you have as your number one policy, we're going to leave the European Union, in a country where over 94% of voters think that's a bad idea and most people are concerned about the effects of the economy. I mean, you might as well be pissing against the wind. Yeah. That's just not going to happen. I mean, and voters who hear it are going to go, well, you're nuts, put you in the nutty pile. And you might, and it seems to have maximized the 5% who want to leave the European Union. You're pissing against the wind there.
But also, if you look at the political landscape in Ireland and you are paying attention, the Greens were an extremely successful party in terms of the agenda that they wanted to drive forward. They got their policies implemented. And so you can be a niche party that is making a proposal to be in government for a suite of policies that don't cover everything. You can just stay out of certain arguments. This business of, having an opinion on everything and, having wild opinions on those big issues. Like, even if the National Party got into government and they wanted to leave the EU, if the government was reliant on them, they got 3 or 4 TDs and the government was reliant on them to formulate a government, the first thing that would go on the programme for government negotiations will be that policy. And that'd be the end of it, dead. So it's never, ever, ever going to happen. So why alienate voters with it? It's absurd.
Yep.
When you could find common ground with the voters on certain things, position yourself like the Greens as a small party that will get in and address a number of key issues, but doesn't have strong opinions on the big stuff because, the other parties can look after that. But no, let's have an opinion on everything and alienate 94% of the electorate. Well,
say no more. Because I thought you weren't going to say the alienate voters thing again, and I had like the perfect hook for our next item. Because I was going to say, speaking of alienating voters, at least none of them pardoned their criminal drug addict son this week.
Well, I'm all for sons, right?
You have a few yourself, I understand.
I have a few myself. I'm a fan. But I just think this is I think this is a big win for people like me who've been calling Democrats and that administration out for their moral hypocrisy for a long time, and rules for thee and not for we and all that kind of nonsense. And it's all big Billy Boy Trump and he's so terrible and we're the goodies and they go low and we go high. And this demonstrates what I've been saying for years, which is that that's actually all a load of shite. And you'll just do whatever suits you in the moment and look after your friends. Like, no one has any issue with somebody loving their child and wanting to protect their child and all of that. And I can get my head around that. But even the most cynical political person in Ireland or across the world, even the most anti-Trump person has to admit that in their heart and soul, they know very well that if Trump had done anything close to this, a cousin, a long-term friend, or anybody, pardoned anybody, they could find even a close, loose relationship with them and Trump, they'd all be bleating and whinging and crying on The View and clutching their pearls at how he was a dictator. And this is no different. Same old shite. They are full of it and they are hypocrites.
Yeah. Well, as you well know, what do I suffer from, Sarah?
Trump derangement syndrome.
That's it. I suffer from Trump derangement syndrome. So
TDS.
I was preparing to get on my high horse. I was taking my Trump derangement syndrome pills. I was getting the anger flowing through my veins. I was ready for, when he takes office and he pardons all those people from January the 6th, which he's kept saying he's going to do. Like, you can't just be pardoning criminals because they're political supporters. This is an attack on norms. Well, now I can't say anything about that, can I really? Been shut up. So TDS is off the table for a while. On the other hand, and I mean, and answer this honestly, hand on heart. were it one of your kids, I know it wouldn't be one of your kids because your sons, who I've met and I can vouch for the listeners, are absolute angels who would never do anything wrong.
Ooh.
But were it one of your sons,
you know very well which one of the two you'd pick if you were to talk. Which one is the wild one? It's fine. Yes. We won't name him.
Were you in that situation though? I mean, this is the thing. I think everything you said about Biden being a hypocrite and everything is entirely correct on a human level. If you're there, you have a couple of weeks left and you can do that for your son. Very hard to say no to that, I think, in fairness to the man. And I'm not defending him on the morals. I'm defending him on the sort of, we all have families life.
I can totally understand that. The difference is, and would I do it if it was one of my kids? Probably. There's the one difference, John. And the one difference is this. I don't claim to be morally superior than other people. And I don't bleat and whinge about everyone who disagrees with me as Hitler. And the Democrats have been talking in big language about Trump and Trump being a dictator and Trump's going to do this and Trump's going to do that. And nobody is above the law. And Trump is a felon and he's this and he's that. And, quite colourful use of language about Trump, when you actually get into it, and we won't today, but when you actually get into the details of the legal cases that we're taking about Trump, felon is, anyway, I'm not going to get into it, but it's nonsense. And these guys have been morally superior and Trump is the devil and Trump is Hitler and Trump is this and Trump is that and Trump and also speculating as to what Trump would do, scaremongering about what Trump would do were he to be elected. And then in the last, few weeks of his term, Biden is doing something that he would be morally outraged and giving out about if Trump did it. So would I do that? Would I pardon one of my children? I'm a mother. Yeah, I probably would. But I wouldn't have spent the last 2 years calling everyone who disagreed with me Hitler and making wild speculations about what they might do when I was about to do it myself. He's known he was going to do that for a long time, John. When he was standing there talking about Trump this and Trump's going to do that and we need better law, we don't need Trump in charge of laws and, all this kind of garbage that they go on with, he knew he was going to do this then. It's the hypocrisy that'll kill you.
I read a report saying he'd first discuss it in June or July. I mean, I as a standalone action, I mean, Bill Clinton, when he left office, pardoned a guy called Mark Rich, who was a fundraiser for him. I think George W. Bush pardoned a couple of guys. Actually, when Trump left office in 2016, he pardoned a guy called Rod Blagojevich, who was a Democratic governor and utterly corrupt from Illinois. I think it was Blagojevich he pardoned. He pardoned a couple of really dodgy pardons on his way out the door. But people, I think the media was so happy to be rid of him and thought he'd be gone that they actually didn't put the boot into him over that. And all presidents do it. But yeah, I think it's just so brazen and blatant. After explicitly having said I won't do it, to then turn around and do it. It's a gift. It's a gift to the incoming Trump administration because it lets them do a whole load of things, as I said, that people with TDS like me might have gone, don't think that's really much in the way of civic norms there, Donald. And well, civic norms have just gone out the window because they can turn around and say, look at the other guys.
But I agree that he shouldn't be pardoning people when he enters office. The point is that it's the consistency. I mean, pardoning people when you're coming in or coming out, going out of office, whatever, is a weird concept for us here. I mean, if you think about it, you just randomly pick people and go, yeah, no, I think I'll get him out. It's a bizarre, legal nugget that they have, and the way it's used is, strange.
I think it's great. Actually, I disagree with you. I think it's great.
Really?
I think it is. Yeah, because so long as there's political responsibility taken for it, because everyone knows. I mean, the American justice system, in particular, sentencing is very harsh. Yeah. So there's a guy I can't remember his name now, who's in prison for running something called the Silk Road, which was basically an online cannabis dealing website on the dark web, and he got like 17 life sentences or something. I know there's a huge campaign for Trump to give him clemency, which is basically let him out of prison because the sentencing is so extreme. I think actually, if there's political responsibility for it, I'm okay with an elected official having the power to go to somebody and say, I think you deserve a pardon and I'm going to let you out of prison.
But they have state by state, they have political accountability in elected legal representation. It shouldn't be down to the president. It undermines the office of the president and makes it look, I don't know, cheap or something to me. Is there a mechanism? Is there a mechanism? No, but I know what you're going to say. That's not what I meant. I'm just saying that, like, if you want to have a mechanism by which, sentences can be challenged, sentences can be reviewed, because I agree that some of their sentences are completely absurdly long and, over dramatic, then have that system. But just this business of a president going in, and I take what your point that, you're saying there should be, as long as there's political accountability. But the point is, John, that if you're walking out of office when you do it, there isn't political accountability.
Yeah, that's true. But sometimes it's, there was a Republican governor of Illinois about, might even be late 1990s. I can't remember the guy's name. But on his way out the door, like literally his last day, he said, by the way, I've always been opposed to the death penalty. There are 22 people on death row in the state of Illinois, and I'm commuting their sentences to life imprisonment. Was that political accountability? Not necessarily, but he had the power to do it, and he did it. And I don't think Illinois has ever executed a person since. That the power for politicians to intervene directly in the judicial system, but only no politician in the US can intervene to say you're going to spend more time in prison. The only thing they can do is intervene to let somebody out earlier to commute a sentence. I'm kind of I really am kind of fine with it, because if it's that outrageous, take him to office, take him to court for misuse of office. I think it's a way, particularly for like a lot of people, most people who get a presidential pardon in the US are people who aren't high profile. Like their campaigns to the president to pardon this guy who was 17, he was arrested for cannabis possession, he's got 30 years in prison for it. That's I think that's fine. I think that's good. It's a good check. That's what I think.
I just don't think that political accountability is there if you've already left. The new person has been elected. They can't be blamed for it because they're not in yet. You walk off, and I don't think that's the way you do things. I think if you want that kind of ability, you create some mechanism to do it, or you make it part of your campaign who you're gonna. I don't know how you'd change it, but I just think walking out the door and throwing a grenade behind you, no.
Well, I'll tell you what, settle this disagreement in the comments on YouTube or wherever you're watching this. And maybe if you're on Spotify or whatever, send us an email, or if you're on Apple, send us an email. Let us know, should Irish politicians have the power to pardon criminals, and would you trust them with it? I think people are going to agree with you, Sarah, but let's find out. What we haven't talked about is the horrific events in New Ross that took place this week, where Malika Al-Khatib met a horrendous end. Obviously, we're limited in what we can say, but just what was your reaction to that? I know what your reaction was, but I'll ask anyway.
I think, we won't get into the specifics, but I don't think it's my imagination anymore that I feel like Ireland is just becoming more and more of a violent country against children, it feels like. But just much more high profile violence, it feels to me. And that might just be my perception. I haven't looked at any official stats on that. But any kind of act of violence that ends in the death of a child is just so horrific. And I don't know what the answer is, but it feels like it used to be an unbelievably rare occurrence, and now it feels like it's not.
Her father, Mohammed Shakar Al-Tabini, has been charged with the murder of his daughter, 8-year-old Malika. Her mother, Aisha Al-Khatib, received injuries in that attack. It was reported, although we do not know how accurately at this stage because we'll await a trial, but it was reported during the week before charges were laid that Malika was attempting to defend her mother from her alleged attacker. I was reading during the week, I was flicking through the Irish Independent, and there was just this block of 4 headlines in breaking news in a row. And they were as follows. First one was, man accused of filming his ex naked and sending the video to his own father, denied bail. Second one was, teenage girl who collapsed outside Dublin's 3 Arena died from ecstasy overdose. Teenage girl. Third one was, CAMH, which I think is a child specialist area, child psychiatrist, jailed for grooming and sexually abusing a teenage girl. Next one was, father figure, former boxing chief, jailed for sexually assaulting young woman and taking intimate photos of her. Those are 4 headlines all in the same day, and it was the same day this happened in New Ross. I mean, I agree with you. I just have this sense that when you and I were growing up in the 1980s, and we were always told what a dark, awful country it was and what awful things happened, but I can't remember a day in the 1980s where you would have had 4 headlines like that. That it would have just been normal. It's bizarre.
Well,
and I hope people know watching this that I hope people know watching this that we, obviously, the accused person in this case is entitled to a fair trial. We're not going to say anything more about guilt, innocence, anything to do with him.
It's nothing to do with the specifics of that case. It's to do with the wider picture of whether or not Ireland is becoming more and more violent and a less safe place for children to grow up. And I think that seems to be the case. And I think that lots of factors play into that, and I'm not sure what they are, but it seems like, we're just becoming more violent.
Well, I'm aware of. I mean, we're all aware of at least 2, and I'm thinking I'm probably missing one, horrific family destruction crimes in Ireland in recent years. There was the case up in Cavan where the father horrifically killed his children, and then there was the case where, and I'm sorry, I really have forgotten the man's name, but he's done wonderful work keeping his children's memory alive. But they were killed, but 3 boys were killed by their mother. I think you might recall, or actually it was 2 boys and a girl killed by their mother.
Yeah.
So there have been a number of crimes of that nature in recent years, and it seems to me that there's a lot of mental health issues out there as well. That's not to say that mental health plays a role in all these crimes. There's a lot of mental health issues out there.
Well, I think you're probably suffering with some degree of mental health issue if you're killing your own children, regardless. But
which is alleged in this case. But yes.
No, I'm talking about the other 2 cases. I'm talking about the other cases you mentioned. But I think that, I don't really know the answer. But I think it's obvious that a lot of people really struggle, and there's a lot of violence in our society, and, a lot of families or a lot of children are vulnerable. And I suppose the only answer you can give to situations where, those stories you mentioned, inter-family things are happening, that we're not a good country for mental health services. The facilities that are available for people who are really struggling, whether it's a mother with, postnatal depression, or postnatal psychosis in some cases. There's been a number of cases of that in Ireland, and our mental health services are just absolutely creaking. It seems they don't exist, and or the accessibility to those kind of services is just unbelievably difficult. And we've just had a general election. I found that the discussion about that was what the different party platforms on that topic was vague at best.
No, I was going to say, what discussion on that?
Exactly. And, that forms a part of the kind of feeling I have of just being a little bit about after that election, because now we're in for 5 years more of, people who are in situations, whether it be scoliosis surgeries or, like we're saying, mental health, screaming and jumping up and down to try and get a spotlight put on the specific health related issue that affects their family, their child, their father, their mother, whatever. And, they will coast into another general election in 5 years where there'll be another vague conversation about it, but nothing will actually happen.
Well, let's move on and finish up on a cheery note, because I don't think we got around to this last week, although maybe we did. But obviously now you and I were both pushing 40. We've maybe 30 years left. And now our children, your children, I'm fine, I'll live. I have none, so I'll survive. But your children, once you hit about 70 odd, now have the option to send you over to the UK to get an early rest and get the inheritance over to them quickly. Were you happy with that? I'm referring to the assisted dying bill in the UK.
Yeah, I know. Oh, good. Thanks for that. No, I think it's grim. And I think it's a race to the bottom on what kind of, how do I say this? I think it's just more of this race to the bottom where there seems to be a determination to reduce any kind of value on life to nothing. Whether it be at the beginning or the end. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised, but I think that, this is depressing. As you say, the kids who want the inheritance, the vulnerable person, but we know from other countries, we've discussed it on the podcast before, it ends up being, 22-year-olds with depression, etc., etc., etc. It's a slippery.
I think I think we did discuss this last week, but that was before the vote had taken place. It's coming back to me because I remember saying that Matthew Parris was the only one I thought made an honest argument, because he was like, yeah, just bump people off for economic reasons, save the state money, and the economy will be saved.
Yeah.
I think he's, that's where, I mean, that's at least an honest argument, because I think that is what the impulse will be for a lot of, state agencies where you have an old person, maybe they're living on their own. Like, I think there'll be leaflets, about, end of life care being discreetly given to people once they hit 73, 74. And one of those will be, have you thought of a peaceful exit? I think that's absolutely going to happen within the next 5, 6, 7, 10 years.
And
pensions demand it.
We've just elected a government again who haven't really made their position clear on that, but I think I can guess. And I'm sure, if it's in the UK now, it'll be on the agenda for this term.
Oh, Micheál Martin will be in his Harvest Day campaigning for that when it comes around to it. I mean, we won't need a referendum here, I don't think, but we can see him now on Virgin Media. The old furrowed brow, the old, I've had a journey on this, and I really think we need to listen to the wishes of elderly people who are saying, they want to have a good life, they want to exit on their terms, and it's a matter of choice. He'll nail that debate. He'll be fine. He'll be up against, poor David.
Is there a lot of older people who are in favour of this? Like, I haven't really seen a lot of 75-year-olds out campaigning hard for this.
You only need one or two. You need one or two sob stories, and that'll get it across the line. Not that there needs to be a referendum. I should emphasise that in Ireland. This can be passed without a referendum. In fact, what's his name? So people before Profit TD, not McMurray, the other one who lost his seat. Oh, maybe it was McMurray. Anyway, they had a bill in this on the last Oireachtas, which died, and then Gino Kenny and McBarry both lost their seats. They were involuntarily euthanized by the electorate. But somebody else will bring it back, I think, in the new Dáil term. It'll be a social democrat project, I think, we'll find. And we'll have a debate on that over the next 5 years, and I suspect, well, it depends on which government it is. I think Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael independent government might hold it off, but a government with Labour and Soc Dems, it's a rock certainty.
I think you're right that a government of Labour and Soc Dems, if you think about it, like, there's only so many jobs and positions to go around. Like, a government of Labour and Soc Dems means that, like, the Soc Dems get a junior ministry and Labour get one too, and that's about it. You know what I mean? Like, they're never going to agree to that. There's just not enough stuff.
And of course, the flip side is that the reason is that one of them that goes into government gets ministerial roles for 5 years, and the one that doesn't gets to take the seats of the one that went into government at the next election. Because those voters, and that was the other thing about the election, that really annoying 14% of the electorate, they vote for the Soc Dems, they vote for Labour, and they vote for the Greens, and they just pick one to shoot every election, and then they vote for the next one. And that's why, that's one of the main reasons I was confident with the Soc Dems before the election, Sarah, was their bloody turn. It won't be their turn next time, especially if they go to government.
But like, that vote get like kind of a, machine gun. Political machine gun, and just like get rid of all of them in one fell swoop.
Yep.
Well, the Greens are gone. Yep. One seat left. Rodders. As you say, it might end up being a worse punishment that it's only him.
I think it'll be a lot harder for the Greens to build back. I mean, when the piece I wrote this week, I was saying Eamon Ryan, when they were out of government last year, out of the Dáil entirely, Eamon Ryan, whatever you like, dislike him, like him, a lot of people found him very likable. He's also hardworking. He's also, interestingly, very passionate on the green stuff. So he was able to build that distinct, we're for the cabbages, we're for the bunny rabbits, we're for planting trees kind of brand. Roderick, much less charismatic and kind of a full spectrum progressive, he'll be a bit lost in the Dáil. I think the Greens are going to have a lot tougher time building back over the next 5 years than they did over the previous period where they got a kick. It's just a hunch.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think Eamon Ryan is like, he's not my political views at all, but you're definitely right that he had more of a likability. And he made green issues a bit more mainstream, a bit more palatable to the average, not necessarily hardcore green voter. Whereas I think Roderick has not got those talents. And I also think that he's kind of very, very negatively associated now with immigration and a number of other things. And I don't think he's going to do well at the rebuild. But luckily he has Hazel Chew there with a bit of time on her hands to help him.
Thing about Eamon Ryan, I always remember, I think this will sum up his political career for me, despite the considerable political achievements in that political career. But when I think of him, I will always think of him during COVID giving the speech about how we should be giving seeds to every house in the country so that we could grow seeds in the back garden, so that if there ever was a food supply, we'd have our sandwiches ready to go. And that was always summed up Eamon Ryan for me. Genuinely well-meaning. He meant that from the heart. You know, we could all take this time to grow a bit of watercress and we'd have some watercress sandwiches and we'd have our sandwiches ready to go. Never thinking about where we get the bread, by the way. Did you ever notice that? He never thought of where we get the bread. It was just we'd have watercress sandwiches ready to go. Genuinely well-meaning, a bit head in the clouds, and yet at the same time ruthlessly effective. So yeah, I think the Greens will miss him dearly, and Roderick will not be anything like as good as he was. That's what I think. Anyway, do you have anything else to add before we say goodbye to the people for this week?
Not for the moment. How long do you think it will be before we will have a government? Is it going to be like the last time, or is it going to go on and on and on?
End of January, I think. I mean, bear in mind, I say that sounds like a long way away, but bear in mind that we are now, you and I have our Christmas party this weekend, by the way. Woohoo. A lot of people are having their Christmas parties. Christmas holidays will be on sort of from the end of next week for a lot of people, especially politicians. They won't do much negotiating over Christmas. I mean, come on. It's going to be like the first item on the table will be the rotating Taoiseach deal. I mean, let's not pretend Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are going to do detailed negotiations over policy. There'll be a few things just to tick off. But the main negotiations will be with the external, like either Labour and the Soc Dems or the Independents. I think they'll have a couple of weeks at the start of January where they pretend to be in serious negotiations with Labour or the Soc Dem, and those talks then break down. And I think a deal with Independents will be done by the end of January. That's my thinking. I don't think it'll take that long, but we'll see. Could be totally wrong.
And what about the rotating Taoiseach?
I think Micheál Martin is too smart to try and put Fine Gael into a position where they are forced to say no. I think he'll do something like, I'll take 3 years, you take 2 years. We get the next European Commissioner because we got more votes, and we get 8 seats at the cabinet table to your 7 and a few more junior ministries than you get. I think, yeah. Do you know what? I've often said I'm not a fan of his, and I'm not a fan of his. That won't change, but he's not. He's self-interested enough not to blow the whole thing up.
Do you think there's any truth in the rumor that he's going to run for president?
I don't think he'd win, and I think it will be a very poor. He'd be a very poor choice of candidate in the first year of a new government's term, when there might just be an anti-government backlash underway.
Yeah,
but and also I think he'd do himself immense damage if he was Taoiseach at the time when he ran for president and lost. I mean, that would be a very personal rejection. So I don't think it's likely at all. Who knows? Maybe he is dreaming that. I hear all sorts of whispers about interesting candidates. Francis Black is one on the left, for example, who apparently going to run under the Palestinian flag. And then I hear whispers about certain senators. I'll say no more than that.
You can tell me when we cut this off.
I heard a rumor during the week about Michael McDowell. I'm just going to say that. Michael, you can
I heard that as well. Yeah.
Yes. But we'll see.
I would love that. I would canvass for that.
Well, you and I do love a good losing campaign, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
We do.
But I mean, the president is supposed to be the protector of the Constitution, and in fairness, nobody's done more to protect the Constitution over the last while than Michael McDowell.
I agree. I would go into battle for Michael McDowell. I would. Well, I can't, obviously, because I am the impartial editor of a news platform.
Obviously.
But I would write a personal article endorsing him for all the votes that would get him. I would do that for Michael. All right, we'll leave it there. I think it's been a pleasure as always chatting to you, Sarah. I look forward to seeing you over the weekend for our Christmas party shenanigans. I'm sorry that the listeners can't join us for that, but it might be a bit crowded. We'll be back next week as the run into Christmas continues. But until then, from Sarah and from me, thank you for listening. That was another edition of The Week That Really Was, and have a good weekend. Take care.